Today's episode is brought to you by Modern Grower. Modern Grower is your source for time and labor-saving farm tools, such as the PaperPot Transplanter, Quick Click Seeder, and the Jang Direct Seeder. Turn laborsome tasks into free time with tools by Modern Grower.
Is above ground and below ground decomposition of carbon equal? So above ground, like the dry biomass, most of that just goes away into the sky when it breaks down. When you go underground, if you look at the dry biomass of the roots, does that break down and volatilize as much as above ground? Because what I'm getting at, would you rather be putting 100 units on soil surface or 100 units below soil surface if you want to keep as much carbon in the soil?
Very, very good question. If you put it on the surface, it won't decompose as fast. So that carbon stays there. It can be blown out, with wind and everything. But if it stays, Argentina is a perfect example. You go to a field in Argentina and you are walking on a mattress of residues. You don't see the soil. There is this much amount of beautiful, small, finely broken soybean and corn stalks residues. That's the true carbon that we are not putting in the atmosphere. That stays there for a long time. What happens eventually, if you don't want it to be, if it's lost, it just goes to another place. So to answer your question, you very, very correctly pointed out, what happens if you put it in the soil? You bring the organic matter in the soil higher, you add in carbon, but there is a fraction of that's lost to CO2. So it's a balance. If you keep it on the surface, it doesn't get decomposed. That's pure carbon. 40 to 50% roughly of that amount of biomass is carbon stored there. You put it in there, 60% of that goes to CO2. So 40% stays.
In the soil.
In the soil, yeah. So, but up there, it's nearly 100%. Because there are no microbes. Slowly, microbe will. So there is normally, this is actually, even we do it in the model, that top mulch works its way through, and that's why the topsoil always has higher organic matter, and this residue never really reach much deeper, except for the rooting system. That over time, if they are well grown and established, you can have root system in corn going down 3 feet, 4 feet down. Alfalfa is nearly 5 meters, and so that I don't know if that explains. So if you leave it there,
it does. And thinking of that thick mat, like one thing I always think is like when you put roots in the soil, you're building soil down, like because the roots are pushing down where you can't go. If you're putting organic matter on top as a mulch, you're building soil up because eventually that mulch layer, like the soil level rises up, correct? Yeah.
You building soils, you making a step that is free over time that you slowly, it takes very little to lose soil, and it takes hundreds of years to build soil. How do you build soils? With exactly the way you said, you're basically building this, that eventually you see things decompose, you put a seed that will grow, right? That's new sorts of, because then it gets mixed in and it slightly improves. If you put it there, it's not that you never want to put it in there because roots are there and you want to keep them there and so on, but some gets decomposed. Now it's a rate. It's a balance, how fast you put it out versus how fast you draw your bank account. So the roots get decomposed, but next year you put more residues and the roots and the yield is getting bigger. Those 3 tons, but you put 4, you accumulated 1. So the prevention, the CO2 is unpreventable. It's part of the decomposition. Now, but there are thresholds. There's complexities. Not always. If it is cold, what happens? Nothing happens. Means the soil's carbon stays like that. It stays like the surface. If it is too wet, also, it can kind of becomes, it gets denitrified, but there is conditions not good. Best example I can do, tropical soils, desert. How much carbon is in those soils? Man, they got rain. They got plenty of vegetation, right? In tropic conditions. Why there's no carbon? There's no carbon. 0.5, 1% less. Everything expedite because of the temperature. So the temperature plays a big role, and soil water content plays a big role. And there is an optimum of mineralization, of decompositions of this. So cold conditions, the prairie, the Midwest, and Illinois soils of 4 or 5%, 3-4%, because they were at 5.5 and they lost it once they tilled. They try. So cold is good, preserves you. Everything is good. Hot turns things down, and so that's also with water content. And so we have functions. Another thing is percent of clay. Percent of clay. Clay plays a protection factor. So basically, by the biogeochemistry, carbon is tied to, and it's much more difficult to decompose on a clay particle. Sandy soils, how much carbon in sandy soil? Significantly lower than clay, because in clay it's protected. We've done soil biology 101, maybe 201, So.
Well, it's good. And, one thing you mentioned a little while back is one of those intermediate forms of carbon, biochar. I've talked to people on the podcast about it. What are your thoughts of it? The theory, you have a chunk of pure carbon, you put it in the soil, it stays there, and it stays there for a very long period of time. While it may not be greatly beneficial to the soil, at least it's not going up into the sky. How do you view it?
I view it positively in terms that it is carbon. It stays there for 100 years. Terra Negra in Brazil, these basically beautiful blacknesses that you may have already heard about, the results of the pyrolysis and slow temperature. So it's a good carbon. The cost benefit is not my analysis to do, but it's equivalent. You say, okay, I'm getting a lot of free carbon that stays in the soil and it's going to build. Does it pay immediately? Not immediately. That's a build up that you do over time, that you basically prime the system to have this carbon. And so it's more of an economic evaluation, because there are other forms of possible amendments that you can add. Now, and again, the goal is not to go in the economic analysis, but it is carbon, it is positive and stays there for a long time. It does improve. The literature is divided. I mean, in terms of saying, because I think, don't want to judge, but they were saying, one study showed yield effect increase, another study decline. You can't translate it like that. It depends where they were done, how the weather occur. It wasn't, even if you isolate everything, sometimes studies forget about the dynamics of, consecutive days that it was hotter versus another. So it's much more complex, and most of these studies were maybe not taken as a system approach of integrating all. So that's really difficult to detangle the immediate impact on that. But I see it as a more, again, just to bring in, what are we adding? We're adding carbon.
Hey there, want to spend less time pulling weeds? Check out Soil Shield by Modern Grower. It's the pre-cut landscape fabric solution to help you drastically reduce weed pressure. Just roll it out, staple it down, and plant. Then let it do the work for you. Say goodbye to endless weeding and hello to more free time. Plus, it's high quality, durable, and will last for years, saving you time and money in the long run. It's available in a variety of row and hole spacings to accommodate all the crops that vegetable farmers grow. Learn more about Soil Shield landscape fabric at shop.moderngrower.co or using the link below.